The room buzzed with anticipation, cameras clicking like soft thunder, lights gliding across polished floors, and whispered conversations weaving between racks of silk gowns and velvet suits. In the center of it all stood Amara Ellis, tall, poised and glowing in a soft gold dress that shimmered every time she moved. To anyone watching, she looked untouchable, like a goddess molded by confidence and grace. But what no one could see, not the stylists adjusting hems, not the makeup artists dabbing last-minute powder, not even the fashion director barking orders into a headset, was the storm quietly brewing just beneath her calm exterior. Amara was used to being watched. It came with the territory, a rising fashion model in New York City, gracing campaigns that now hung in storefront windows across Soho and billboards in Brooklyn. But the kind of watching that followed her today felt different. It wasn't admiration, it wasn't professional. It was ... entitled. They had started showing up weeks ago, 3 of them, always just outside the crew circle, never with cameras, never with credentials, just leaning, lounging, always present, like shadows, with designer sneakers and unchecked grins. No one invited them, but no one questioned them either, because they laughed with the photographers, because they nodded knowingly at the creative director, because entitlement often wore expensive watches and charming smiles. Today, they were back, lounging near the smoothie bar that was set up for the crew. One of them, the tallest, with a too-white smile, lifted his phone, pretending to scroll. Amara felt his eyes before she saw them. That kind of gaze was impossible to miss, the kind that didn't see a person, only a prize. She held her posture steady, spine like steel beneath the silk. That's what she'd been taught, never let them see you fold. Her grandmother's words echoed from years ago, there's strength in silence, baby. But only until silence becomes permission. The stylist fluttered around her, fixing a hem. You look stunning, Amara. Pure art. She smiled politely. Thank you. But the warmth didn't reach her eyes. Not today. She stepped into the set, a grand hall of mirrors for the shoots, theme, and the transformation was instant. Her walk turned fluid, her expression fierce. The camera loved her. It always did. She was elegance and fire, a muse in motion. The director clapped after a particularly sharp turn. Yes, that's it. You own this. And she did. For a few minutes, the world narrowed to shutter sounds and flashes, and Amara was untouchable again. But perfection is a moment. And moments pass. On the break, she walked toward the dressing area. As she rounded the corner, laughter trailed behind her. A soft whistle followed, not the kind for dogs, but the kind meant to summon, like she was an attraction. She didn't turn around. Hey, said a voice, casual and too familiar. You always this serious, or do you save your smiles for the camera? Amara paused. She didn't want to be here, not like this, not alone, in a hallway with 3 men who didn't understand or didn't care about the boundaries between attention and invasion. Still, she turned. I'm working, she said, tone calm but firm. The tallest one stepped forward, undeterred. We're not interrupting, just appreciating. You've got something, ... real. She met his eyes, not shy, not defiant, just ... still, then appreciate from over there. The moment stretched thin like a thread about to snap. Then he laughed, raising both hands. All right, no harm meant. They backed off, but their smirks stayed. When she entered the makeup room again, she found her manager, Cynthia, checking emails with a frown etched deep into her forehead. They're here again, Amara said without preamble. Cynthia didn't even glance up. Who? You know who? The ones who act like they belong. Amara. Cynthia finally looked at her, her voice a soft warning. They're connected. They're friends of the executive producer. So Amara's voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. Does that excuse it? No, but you know how this works. You've worked too hard to let this become ... a thing. Her heart sank. There it was, the unspoken rule. Survive quietly. Succeed quietly. Don't stir the water, even if you're drowning in it. I'm not making it a thing, she said. They are. Silence. Then Cynthia nodded, reluctantly. I'll have someone keep an eye. That was all. She didn't expect more. She hadn't in a long time. Later that evening, the team moved to an outdoor set, a rooftop lounge with fairy lights strung overhead, and the skyline glowing like a watercolor painting. The air buzzed with city sounds and soft jazz. Amara stood, near the edge, watching the traffic below like tiny streams of light. She exhaled slowly. There was something about the edge, the space between where you stand and where you could fall, that always brought clarity. A shadow moved beside her. She didn't look. She already knew. "You know," the same voice said, smooth as silk. "Someone like you could go far. But not everyone plays nice in this business. Might help to have the right people looking out for you." Amara turned her head slightly. "Have people," he chuckled. "No offense, but from where I stand, looks like you're pretty alone up here." She finally faced him, expression unreadable. "Why are you really here?" He shrugged. "Connections, opportunities, you know how it is. But you're not a photographer, not a producer, not crew. I'm whatever I need to be," he said with a wink. "Then be gone." That stopped him for a moment. He laughed, but it was a bit thinner now, feisty. She took a step forward, not away, not toward him, just ... forward. Her voice was quieter now. "You think because I smile for cameras that I won't speak up? Because I walk in heels I can't stand my ground? Because I don't fight the way you expect ... I can't fight at all." He looked amused, but uncertain. "It's a party. Need for drama? Then don't bring it." And just like that, she walked away, not hurried, not afraid. But he didn't see the months of training behind that stride. He didn't know about the gym, where she trained every morning before castings, didn't know about Master Ree, who taught her control was more powerful than chaos. Didn't know that beneath her designer gown, her body remembered every movement, every block, every strike, every breath of discipline. Because Amara Ellis wasn't just a model, she was a warrior. And tomorrow, if he pushed one step further, he'd learn exactly what that meant. The next morning arrived quietly, but Amara was already awake before sunrise, standing barefoot on the smooth hardwood floor of her studio apartment. The city outside hadn't yet stirred, its noise still curled in sleep, but her body moved with practiced rhythm, steady and controlled. She exhaled, lifted her arms, and began her first kata. Each motion was deliberate, not rushed, not showy, just focused. In this space, a modest, sun-drenched corner of Harlem, lined with plants and framed campaign posters, Amara was not being watched, not judged, not styled or positioned. Here, she belonged only to herself. And in these early hours, she returned to the part of her that no one in the fashion world saw. She'd trained in martial arts since she was 9. After a boy twice her size pushed her down in a school hallway and told her she didn't walk right, her mother, a nurse who worked nights, signed her up for classes. The next week, not for revenge, for resilience. That word had followed her like a quiet anthem ever since. Resilience, when agencies told her she was too tall. Resilience when designers used her as their diversity quota. Resilience when she was told to tone down her confidence so she wouldn't intimidate the room. Now, she moved through the kata like a song. She didn't need mirrors. Her body remembered. A sharp knock at the door broke the flow. She paused, breathing through the interruption, and walked to answer it. Sweat still cooling on her arms. It was her friend and neighbor, Lila, holding 2 coffees and a bakery bag with a victorious grin. "Peace offering," Lila said. "Also, I baked, which means I'm either in love or stressed." Amara smiled, letting her in. "Which is it?" Both Lila sighed. "But we'll get to that. First, tell me why you looked like you were going to torch the rooftop last night. Someone say something." Amara sat down on the window ledge, cradling the warm cup between her palms. They were back, and they were bolder. Lila's smile faded. "Same guys. Yeah, the one with the watch cornered me. Told me I needed protection in this industry." Lila blinked, jaw tight. "From what? Success?" Amara shook her head slowly. "From people like him." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged, like air before a storm. "You told Cynthia, right?" "She told me not to stir the pot." "She said that." Amara looked away. "Not in those exact words, but that's the message." Lila crossed her arms. "You know what's wild? These people build empires on your image, your beauty, your strength, but the moment you speak like you actually have a spine, they treat you like a liability." Amara didn't answer right away. She sipped her coffee and looked out the window where early light painted the city in soft golds. "They see what they want," she said finally, "and most of the time, they want silent strength, not loud boundaries." Lila stared at her. "But you're not silent strength. You're fire disguised as elegance." Amara smiled gently. "Yeah, and maybe it's time someone got burned. Later that afternoon, Amara arrived at the next shoot. A new location, different set, but some things, predictably, had not changed. They were already there. Bryce was chatting with a stylist, like they were old friends. Drew, the bold one, leaned near the lighting director, sipping something expensive. The third, Ethan, lingered by the monitor where the photographer reviewed test shots. They looked relaxed, untouchable, unyet, Their presence was a cloud, not thunderous, not loud, but heavy, unwelcome. As Amara stepped into the makeup chair, the assistant, a quiet man with kind eyes, nodded and said softly, "I'm glad you're here. You changed the energy in a room." She thanked him, surprised but warmed by it, because it was true. She did change energy when she was allowed to take up space. The director clapped loudly. "All right, team, we're going edgy today. Think power, confidence, royalty with attitude. And Amara, you're the queen." That word, queen, they loved to say it, sprinkle it on ads and editorials like glitter. But queens, she thought, are only worshipped when they stay on their thrones. The moment they step down, speak up, or push back, people get nervous. The shoot began. She delivered, her eyes locked with the lens like it owed her something. Her posture screamed strength. Her presence swallowed the room whole. But during a lighting reset, as she stepped off the set for a breath, she heard it again, a whisper, low, mocking, just audible enough. "She thinks she's untouchable." Then, a chuckle, a scrape of a shoe, and footsteps behind her. Amara didn't turn, not yet, because something inside her had shifted. Not anger, not fear, just certainty. Today would be the last day they followed her, not because someone else would stop them, not because a manager would step in, but because she would. And when Drew finally reached her side, standing too close again, trying once more to shrink the space between power and violation, she turned, calmly, and looked him in the eye. "I need you to step back." He smiled, lazy. "Relax. We're all friends here." "We're not friends. That's not very queen-like." Amara tilted her head. "No, it's warrior-like." He blinked, confused. "What?" And that's when she stepped aside, not back, but to the side, leaving him slightly off balance. The same kind of movement she'd practiced 1,000 times in dojos and gym mats. A pivot, subtle, but powerful. She didn't touch him, didn't threaten, but the shift in energy was enough. He stumbled half a step, caught himself, and suddenly, her silence wasn't weakness, it was precision. She said nothing more, just looked at him, steady, unshaken, then turned and walked away, her heels clicking like punctuation on a sentence he didn't know he'd just read. Back at her dressing room, Cynthia waited. "I heard something happened," she said, eyes wary. Amara didn't sit. She stood tall. "If those men are on set tomorrow, I won't be." Cynthia started to object. "Amara, don't." "I'm not asking." Cynthia looked at her, really looked, and for once, saw the line that had been drawn. It wasn't angry. It wasn't messy. It was final. After a moment, Cynthia nodded. "I'll make some calls." Amara didn't say thank you. Not because she wasn't grateful, but because some victories don't need applause, just action. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that in a quiet studio corner of New York, a woman had taken her power back, not with fists, but with presence, not with violence, but with unshakable truth, and the world would never look at her the same again. The sound of her own breath was the only thing Amara focused on, as she walked through the glass doors of the agency headquarters the next morning. Every click of her heels echoed like intention. No music, no flashbulbs, no filtered lighting, just her and the quiet tension of decisions long overdue. The receptionist greeted her with a practiced smile that flickered when she noticed Amara wasn't smiling back. She was still polite, still poised, but there was something different now, like a current had shifted beneath still waters. Cynthia was waiting upstairs, tapping her tablet with carefully managed urgency. "They've been removed from the guest list for the remainder of the campaign," she began, barely looking up. "Jared said it won't happen again." Amara nodded. "Good," but her voice didn't carry relief. It carried resolve, because "won't happen again" was not the same as "was wrong in the first place." And deep down, Amara knew this wasn't about 3 men who crossed the line. It was about the silence that allowed them to believe the line didn't exist. She glanced at the large agency photo board. Walls of faces, young and fierce, lined like trophies, some smiling, some defiant. Most women of color in the bottom rows, like an afterthought that had to fight its way into the frame. That board always made her think of chess. The pawns go first, but what no one says is that the queen is the most dangerous piece. On the way out, she bumped into Nadine, a new model barely 21 with eyes full of wonder and insecurity. Nadine had the look agencies loved, lean and angular, with cheekbones sharp enough to cut doubt. But today, her eyes flickered with something else. "You're Amara Monroe, right?" "I am. I saw the shoot yesterday, and how you handled things." Amara gave a small smile. "What did you see?" Nadine hesitated. "Someone who didn't shrink." That answer struck Amara harder than expected, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. Someone who didn't shrink. After Nadine left, Amara walked slowly back through the street, letting the city breathe around her. Cars honked, sidewalks pulsed, people shouted into phones, or disappeared behind mirrored sunglasses. But beneath it all, something quieter had begun. A ripple, because strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the spaces where others stay silent. By late afternoon, she was back in her apartment. Same space, same light, but something had shifted inside her. She didn't feel like just preparing for another campaign or another shoot. She felt like preparing for change. So she pulled out a small black notebook, edges worn from years of travel, and began writing. Not a memoir, not a tell-all, just stories, moments, truths the industry never made space for, but that others needed to hear. She started with herself. The first time someone told her she was too much. The first time she was asked to smile more because her confidence made people uncomfortable. The moment she realized they called her fierce only when it served their narrative, but difficult when it served their convenience. And the first time she realized no one would protect a reputation like she could protect her own. By nightfall, 3 pages were filled. Her handwriting slanted with emotion, not elegance, but it didn't matter. This wasn't for editors. It was for every girl who'd be told to dim her light just enough to be palatable. Later that week, Amara was invited to speak on a panel, Women in Fashion, Power, Presence, and Progress. It was the kind of invite that once felt like validation. Now, it felt like responsibility. Backstage, stylists flurried, and assistants handed out glossy programs like business cards. The room buzzed with compliments that felt rehearsed. "You're such an icon. Your presence is so magnetic. I've followed your work for years." She smiled when appropriate, but kept her focus. She wasn't here to be admired. She was here to be heard. When it was her turn to speak, she walked onto the stage not like a model on a runway, but like someone carrying weight others didn't. And when the moderator asked, "What advice would you give to young women entering this space?" she didn't pause. She leaned into the mic and said, "Stop asking for permission." The room went still, not tense, just quiet. Stop asking for permission to take up space, to set boundaries, to be complex, demanding, excellent. Because this industry, this world, will always celebrate your beauty while quietly hoping you stay quiet. Don't. Someone in the second row started clapping softly at first, then stronger, then more joined, because the truth was not new, but hearing it without apology was. After the panel, Amara stepped off stage, exhaling. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from release. Years of tension exiting her body, one word at a time. Her phone buzzed. A message from her agent. "New client wants to build a campaign around powerful voices. They asked for you." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked up, noticing a mural across the street, a woman painted 3 stories high. Hair wild and crown tilted, gaze fierce. It looked like her, not her face, exactly, but her spirit, and for the first time, she understood something, simple yet profound. The power she had wasn't just in her stance or her silence. It was in her story, and now, she was ready to tell it on her terms. It began as a small idea, quiet, like all the powerful ones are. At first, what if she wasn't the only one with a story that deserved more than whispers? What if there were others, women who had stood their ground, swallowed their fear, smiled through disregard, and stayed silent because they were told professionalism looked like patience? That idea took root as Amara stared at the ceiling one night, unable to sleep. Outside, the city murmured in neon and taxi horns, but in her apartment, there was only the sound of pages turning. She went back through her black notebook, the stories she'd written, the names she'd chosen to protect, and the truths she'd chosen not to. It felt incomplete, not because she hadn't written enough, but because it wasn't just her voice that mattered. A week later, Amara reached out to an old contact, Lila Santos, a journalist known for capturing truth without gloss. Years ago, Lila had profiled Amara for a no-defunct fashion blog, and even then, her questions had dug deeper than fabrics and photo ops. Lila picked up after 2 rings. Amara Monroe. Haven't heard that voice in a long time. I'm working on something, Amara said. Something real. Not for brand deals, not for applause. I'm listening. That's how The Unseen was born. Not a magazine, not a podcast, not a campaign. A movement. A platform for women, especially black women in fashion, film, and media, to share the parts of their journey that were edited out of their narratives. Not polished stories, but raw, real, and rooted in truth. Lila offered the writing framework. Amara brought the network. And within weeks, inboxes began filling with submissions. Stylists who were talked over, models who were touched without consent, makeup artists told their work was too ethnic, interns made to feel invisible unless they were needed for optics. No rage, no rants, just stories, the kind of truth that lives in quiet places for too long. Each piece they published went live without names, unless permission was given. Amara's story was the first, not the viral version people thought they knew, but the version that revealed her heart, her hesitations, her bruised pride. The article closed with a single sentence that read, "Strength is not in how loudly you respond, it's in knowing when silence is a disservice." The response was overwhelming. Comments flooded in. DMs too, from women who said they finally felt seen, not because Amara had fought back, but because she'd chosen not to disappear afterward. Some messages came from unexpected places, men in the industry who admitted to their silence, their complicity, their realization that watching something happen and doing nothing was not neutrality, it was participation. One message stood out from the rest. It was from a woman named Diana, a former assistant photographer who had left the industry entirely. Her message read, "I walked away because I thought the price of staying was my dignity. Reading this gave me back a part of myself." Amara read it twice, and again, because she remembered that feeling, wondering if walking away meant failure, or if staying meant surrendering something more important. She replied with one sentence, "You didn't fail, you chose peace." As The Unseen grew, Amara's own visibility changed. No longer just a model, she was now introduced at events as an advocate and a creative voice. It sounded good on paper, but she remained careful not to let the spotlight distract her from the mission. During a panel in Brooklyn, someone asked, "Do you ever regret not making a bigger scene that night?" Amara paused, "No, because what I'm building now lasts longer than a viral clip." The audience was silent, not because they disagreed, but because they understood. This was never about retaliation, it was about reclamation, and it was working. Months passed, and a new generation of models began citing The Unseen in interviews. Agencies started rethinking how they structured shoots, who they allowed on set, and how they trained staff. Small changes, quiet shifts, but change is never instant. It simmers before it stirs. One evening, Amara received an invitation to speak at a major global summit, not fashion-focused, but culture-focused. The email said, "We want to feature your story, not for how it went viral, but for how you turned it into something lasting." She closed her laptop and looked out the window at the city lights blinking like stubborn stars. Her story had once been something that nearly made her quit. Now it was a reason others stayed. That night, she didn't write in her notebook. She didn't plan a speech. She simply sat with the quiet, with the weight of every name she carried in her heart, the women who'd reached out, who'd spoken up, who'd healed by being heard. Because somewhere along the way, Amara realized something most people never do. When you find your voice, you don't just speak for yourself. You speak for every person who still can't. The room was quiet, except for the low hum of the sound tech adjusting Amara's mic behind the curtain. Just beyond the velvet divider, hundreds of chairs filled the event hall, all facing a stage washed in soft gold lighting. The summit had drawn people from all corners of the world, not just fashion insiders, but educators, entrepreneurs, artists, and youth leaders. And tonight, Amara wasn't just another name on the program, she was the keynote. the moment still felt surreal. Even as she stood in heels, she'd chosen more for confidence than comfort. The same feet that once walked hesitant into castings, now stepped onto stages with purpose. Not to perform, but to plant something deeper. A voice in her ear whispered, 2 minutes, Ms. Monroe. She closed her eyes, not in fear, but in focus. There was a time when she would have rehearsed every syllable, memorized every word to avoid being misunderstood, but not anymore. Now, she spoke the way she lived, rooted in truth, not polish. When she walked onto the stage, the applause was immediate, warm, not wild, like the kind of welcome you give to someone who's earned your trust, not just your admiration. She didn't thank the audience right away. Instead, she told a story. Years ago, she began, I walked into a studio, wearing a silk dress and the kind of silence people mistake for agreement. A murmur of recognition passed through the crowd. I didn't know then that silence could feel like armor, but also like a cage. She paused. I wore both well, until I couldn't. She talked about the moment that went viral, not the way the headlines told it, but the way her heart remembers it, the breath she held, the decision she made not to retreat, and the instant she realized her value wasn't up for debate. But what happened after, she said, was the real beginning. She shared how the unseen was born, how it gave others a way to be heard without being exposed, how voices long buried began to rise like a tide. But she didn't stop there. I'm not here to tell you I was brave. I'm here to tell you I was tired. And tired can be a beginning if you let it be. That line stopped the room, because everyone knows tired. But not everyone sees it as the start of something. Her voice softened. There's a quiet kind of power in choosing not to disappear, in deciding that your dignity doesn't need to be dramatic, to be undeniable. The screen behind her began displaying images from the unseen, a collage of stories, sketches, quotes, faces blurred or shadowed, for privacy but never for shame. Amara turned slightly to look at them. These women, these voices, they're not just contributors to a movement. They are the movement. And they didn't come forward because they were unafraid. They came forward because being invisible started to cost them too much. Applause rose again, not the polite kind, the kind that said, yes, that's it. After the speech, Amara stepped into a private lounge, heart still pounding, not from nerves, but from connection. That kind of honesty always came with weight. Lila was waiting, smiling with a look that said you did what needed to be done. But there was someone else in the room, a young woman barely 20, with large eyes, dark curls, and a nervous energy tucked behind her straight posture. She stepped forward. I'm sorry to bother you, she said, voice shaking slightly. My name's Marin. I wanted to say thank you. Amara smiled gently. You're not bothering me. I've followed you since your campaign with the Southlight brand. But what you said tonight, I didn't know I needed to hear it until I did. Amara sat beside her. No cameras, no audience, just two women in different stages of becoming. What part hit you the most? She asked. Marin hesitated. The part about being tired. I think I've been confusing my exhaustion with weakness. No, Amara said quietly. It's wisdom. It's your spirit telling you something has to change. And now that you've heard it, you get to choose what you do next. Marin blinked back tears, nodding. I don't know if I'm ready to tell my story yet. You don't have to, Amara replied. But promise me you won't pretend. It doesn't matter. That moment, quiet and unnoticed by most, mattered more than the standing ovation. Because Amara didn't want followers. She wanted a WAKENINGS. In the weeks that followed, more stories poured into the unseen. Not just from fashion, but from tech, academia, sports, even healthcare. Women who had found the courage to speak, not because they saw themselves in Amara, but because she reminded them they already had a voice. Brands began taking notice in deeper ways. Not just inclusion hires or surface-level campaigns, but real structural changes, safer sets, stronger boundaries, more diverse decision-makers. But Amara didn't focus on the headlines anymore. She focused on what came after. Late one evening, she returned to the rooftop where everything had first boiled over. The skyline looked the same, but she didn't. She stood at the same spot she had once leaned into to collect her composure. But this time, she didn't look down. She looked forward. Someone behind her asked, "Do you miss the version of you from before all of this?" Amara turned. "No," she said, "because I'm finally living as the version that was always waiting." The city kept moving below, unaware of the revolution that had begun in soft words and fierce silence. A revolution that didn't ask for permission, didn't wait for applause, and didn't need to shout to be heard. It just kept going. Like her asterisk, the story didn't end with applause. It rarely does. Stories like Amara's don't wrap up with music swells and slow fades. They evolve, ripple, echo into places far beyond where they began. And that's exactly what this one did. Months after the summit, Amara found herself in places she never thought she'd be, not just on fashion runways, but in classrooms, community halls, behind closed doors of boardrooms, and on mentorship calls with women from all over the world. Some were models, some were not, but all of them carried one thing in common. They had something to say, and somewhere along the way, they'd been taught to whisper it. One afternoon, Amara sat across from a small panel of students at an arts university in Chicago. The professor had invited her for a conversation on courage, though Amara laughed at the title. "I'm not sure courage is what I had," she said, "but I had enough clarity to know when silence no longer served me." A student in the back raised her hand. Her name was Nevaeh, soft-spoken but steady. "When you were in it, when it was happening, how did you know you'd come out the other side? How did you trust there was another side?" The question sat in the air. Amara looked out the tall window beside her. Wind stirred the branches of a tree, shedding its last golden leaves. "I didn't know," she said finally. "That's the part no one really says out loud. I didn't know I'd be okay. I didn't know if speaking up would end my career, or if staying quiet would end something in me. I just knew I couldn't keep living in between." She paused, voice steady now. "I stepped forward not because I was sure, but because I was done pretending that discomfort was normal." The room was silent, not awkward, not uncertain, just listening, deeply. That became Amara's rhythm, showing up in small spaces and letting her truth remind others of their own. She had long let go of being the center of the spotlight. Now, she was more interested in lighting others, making sure the next generation didn't just survive in the shadows, but stood tall in the sun. But with growth came resistance too. One day, the unseen received a letter from a major fashion conglomerate. It was dressed in polite language, but carried an undercurrent of pressure. Reconsider naming practices, avoid sharing industry patterns, stick to positive storytelling. It wasn't a threat, but it was a warning. Lila read the letter twice, and called Amara immediately. "They're not scared of your story," she said. "They're scared of the stories you're making space for." Amara didn't flinch. "We're not changing a thing." And they didn't. In fact, they leaned in harder. They created an entire anonymous archive, a protected space where stories could be submitted without fear of exposure or retaliation. The archive became a digital tapestry of resilience. Dancers, baristas, interns, designers, students, mothers, all sharing moments where they chose integrity over ease. Some stories ended with confrontation, others with quiet exits, but every single one ended with clarity. Then came the letter that changed everything. It arrived in a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a single page, handwritten, "You don't know me, but I was there that night on the rooftop. I saw you. I didn't step in. I froze. I've hated myself for it ever since. But because of you, I found the strength to step forward in my own way. I've since reported my experience. I've started healing. I'm sorry I wasn't braver sooner. Thank you for not waiting on someone else to act." No name, no signature, just truth. Amara held the letter for a long time, not because it hurt, but because it mattered. The quiet ones often do. 1 month later, at the 3rd annual Unseen Summit, Amara opened with that letter, not to shame the writer, but to honor their step forward. "I share this," she said, "because bravery isn't always loud or instant. Sometimes it starts with silence, and ends with a whisper that changes everything." The audience rose to their feet, but Amara didn't soak in the applause. She simply stepped back from the mic and looked out at the faces before her, faces that now saw themselves as more than survivors. They were architects of change. After the summit, Amara slipped out early. No press, no staged photos, just her and the city night. She walked until she reached the same block where it all started, outside the old warehouse studio, now under renovation. The scaffolding had gone up, and a banner read, "Future home of the Center for Creative Justice, a space for voices that redefine power." She smiled. Of course, The building would become something else now, not a site of silence, but a center of strength. The past had left its mark, yes, but the future was rewriting it in full color. As Amara turned to leave, her phone buzzed. It was a text from her mother. "Saw your speech. Grandma would be proud. You broke the cycle, but more than that, you built something better in its place." Amara didn't reply right away. She stood there for a long moment, a woman no longer bound by a single story, but carried forward by hundreds she had helped uncover. And in the quiet of the street, with the city pulsing around her, she whispered not a goodbye, but a promise. "This isn't the end, it's just the start of the stories we were never meant to forget."